this hierarchy is just the first step. That's just the basis. That's the starting point. Once we have this, we dig deeper. We go into each step and look for very specific metrics. How to find out how consumers or users are feeling, are evaluating how the job is done. Only then it starts. So, and we need this very concrete and large extent of metrics, because if you give a developer a brief and say develop something convenient, he will develop something that is convenient for him and not for the user. That's a bit the problem. So we try to get this bias out of the picture and have the concrete insight. So what do we do? So we ask about a job. We start with a job step. One on the list. It can be higher up or lower up, and then we trigger stories, problems. There are not so many. I mean, it can take time. It can take steps. It can lead to a wrong result or a good result. Sometimes, sometimes good result. Sometimes it doesn't work. Be sure that something is happening. So we're triggering stories. This is an example from a doctor, and through the questioning, there were these stories about amongst doctors. It's quite common to ask, how many charts are you behind today? A chart is a patient record where they write basically down, and they're constantly behind on the charts, and they say it like this. I used to work the documentation after work. That was horrible. It takes me more and more time now. I try to finish the documentation before moving on to the next patient. No? So we try to trigger these stories, and then based on these stories we work with the respondents to phrase a statement, a metric, we call it, a value metric. For example, here it was to have to work overtime as rarely as possible to catch up on the documentation. So these statements, Tony calls them outcomes, Christensen calls them hiring criteria. Tony has defined what it is. It has a clear syntax, a bit complicated one, a bit odd one, but it is defined. Christensen has not defined it. He just talks about hiring criteria, and we have also defined it. We say it has 3 elements. First element is the result you obtain or the result you want to avoid. That's the key. What do you want to obtain or achieve, and what do you want to avoid? And here you can take out the solution. What you want to achieve with pressing a button is that there are as few steps as possible. So you want to have, or that it takes as little time as possible. So, until the software, or until you can start work, let's say. So the result is you want to start work. The unit is as little time as possible, and then there is maybe a context that you put in. So that's what we try to do. And by talking to 5 users, we get about 60% of these all possible statements, and there are about 120. And if we talk to 20 users, we systematically get 200 of these statements. And they are all written in this format, and they're all put into the job hierarchy where they belong to. So it's hard work, but it's key, because each one of them can be a great insight, and can be a specification for product development. It can be a business idea on its own. But when you talk to 20, you had 200 of these statements. You don't know which of these statements is important or relevant. You don't know, because only one. If one user says it, you take it. But you don't know. If 5 users say the same thing, you still don't know if it's relevant, because there can be 15 others or 25 others who don't say it. That's just science. And that's where lean is dangerous, because lean tries to iterate quickly. with the hope that the iteration will lead to the right result. But it can take a long time. So that's why we are lean. We try to be lean, but at the same time, we have to be careful. So that's the value metric. Tony calls them, ODI calls them outcomes and hiring criteria. And they are very important. Just about the units. You know units, kilometers per hour. So to drive a car, kilometers per hour. That's a unit. Huh? How fast? You can rephrase that, and that it takes as little time as possible until you arrive. Clicks per order. That's a known metric in software. But you can also say number of fearful moments when you drive in a car. You know, this happens. There are these moments of fear happening, and the context when you drive yourself, or when it's raining, or when you are a passenger, that can be different. So these units, you have to be creative with the units, but it works. It works, and that's how it's judged. We did car studies. That's how they talk. You know, I had this horrible moment, and I thought we crash. How did you feel about it? This was not very good. So is it important for you that during a trip you get as few of these horrible moments as possible? Yeah, I don't want a few, I want none. No? So we have then a scheme in our head where we say, okay, never have a moment. So this is a bit complicated, but that's the scheme we have in our head. It says when you do something, when it is a job step, what's the result you wish to obtain or avoid? What's the unit you apply? And what's the context? What's the context? That's what we have in our mind when we do these interviews. Yeah? And so we build it up. So we know that 30 interviews we get 100% of the metrics. We don't learn anything new. We do the 31st interview, nothing new. It even starts at 10, 12. Huh? Suddenly you have an interview, you didn't learn anything new. So we know that the curve is flattening. And then we systematically write them down. Now, can this work in startup environment? We believe it, yes, but it needs discipline. Huh? And having a list of 100 of these metrics, you don't have to go to 200, but 100 of very concrete metrics can be very inspiring. And you can, even if you don't validate it, you can make a bet and say that's it, and you go out and you do testing, you do prototyping, and you realize, okay, we've talked to five users, they're all confirmed, it's probably right. It's all about probability. Sometimes you don't have the time to do more.
Do some kind of clustering of all these things?
Yeah, they're all clustered. They're all clustered along this. They're all clustered. Where is it? Based on this. No? So each of these metric is either here, or here, or here, or here, or higher. And it's tracked. And then we take it, and we take the 200, we reduce it down to 100 max. We might rewrite this, but we put it basically in a questionnaire, and we do an online survey or a telephone. Maybe most of the time we do phone, and we let it rate. We let real users rate it. That's market research practice. That's how ODI does it. We just do it a bit different. So we ask them each of these metrics, how important is it to you? And they rate, and they say important. If it's really important, they give a 5. If it's not, it's very important, a 4. Not so important, 3. And then we ask the same on fulfillment. So this is German because I put it in today, but this is fulfillment, satisfaction. So we ask, how satisfied are you? And they say, I'm totally happy, totally satisfied, 5, and so on. And then we map the two, And basically what we can say, if it's on this side, we can say 100% of the users in this group find it important. And if it's here only on 2, we say, okay, 20% only are satisfied, therefore it's a pain point. And an opportunity for innovation. And this is when you read ODI, you see this, but ODI has, in our view, a flaw. ODI simply states that everything underneath here, on this side, is our pain points. They basically draw a line here from 5 up to there, and they say all this is our pain points. We agree that they are all pain points, but we have done studies where you do where you get in 2 countries different clouds. In France, for example, the clouds tend to be more to the left than in Germany. So it's relative, and why is this? Our hypothesis is the French school system. In the French school system, you never get a 10, therefore you never give a 10. And therefore, everything is like kind of to the left.
12 out of 20 is the best grade.
Exactly. So that means that you have to look at it relatively. You don't have to look at it in absolute terms how ODI does it. There we're pretty convinced because we've done comparison, and we clearly saw the same pain points in France and in Germany, but the cloud in Germany was to the left, more to the left, and the one in France was more to the left than the one in Germany. But the insights were the same. And we think we have to look at it relatively. So if you have this list of 100, they are rated somehow to each other on importance, and this gives a relative reading. Can you do this as a startup? On a smaller scale, yes. We did it for Doodle. You know Doodle. It's just pragmatic. They had their users and they had non-users, and they did a mailing, an online, maybe a simplified list, not 100 statements, but 50, and get a kind of a reading on it. And that's better than just... And it's market research, basic market research, which is very old, but it's the key is the exploration is done differently than.
Can you maybe clarify what each point represents?
Each point is a value metric or an outcome. So there are about 100 of these value metrics on this graph. And this was done with 192 users or people, and it was done for the FIFA Museum, and they were very interesting insights. Quite often we get the result, we knew this before. It's clear. I mean, this is basic. And then we asked them, yeah, but why don't you do something about it? So, in a museum, toilet is always a problem. You have 2 toilet problems. One is women and men. So the women toilet is always overloaded, and the male toilet is always empty. So they were building it, and we said, okay, hey, what's your plan? And there were 50-50 split. Trivial, basics, get the basics right.
Unisex toilets, that's the thing.
So we had quite a bit of basics. Locker, so wardrobe. You put wardrobe system or locker system. So today people come, it's not coats anymore. They come with bags and things like this. And then also insights, for example, real things that are higher up. For example, leaving a place like this. Now, before you have all the excitements going up and down, then you leave it and it makes. So there is this frustration of we just had a great time. Afterwards, what happens? Nothing, and they don't take care of you afterwards. That's a typical upward job. So how can you manage to travel home from the museum home? How can you celebrate this? How can you do more value there? Because it was a frustration point. Yeah.
Maybe how much, I don't know how well users are able to answer without each bias the thing. But I see usually it's multi-task for 7. So, and how much through observation would be able to actually have remove such bias or introduce more? But is there, and you do it a bit with these 2 steps, like the first step is observation. How much is that different than if you were doing more observation with more people, or is it so usually it's marginal the difference that hey, don't get it?
I mean, in our experience, and some people don't like this, but we think with observation you gain something. There's no doubt about it. But observation, ethnography, is always combined with interviewing. So they always observe a behavior and then they ask. Huh? We do home visits, but sometimes budget does not allow to do observation. It's simply too expensive. We worked for farmers, for Syngenta. I mean, the job was to grow crop, and that starts in January and that then ends in December. So that's the full job. You cannot observe. So sometimes observation is very expensive or even not possible. We sometimes, I mean, we think, we claim that with our interviews we get almost as much out of an interview than out of an observation. That's a claim. We cannot prove it. But we have some evidence. We did, for example, for a car, it was about seats, car seats. And if you drill, you get suddenly this funny behavior that you would observe. So people get into a car, and then you ask, so what's the first thing you do? And then they start the engine. They say, no, stop. Let's start again. Okay, you open the door. Okay, solution. You open the door. What do you do next? Well, no, I open the back door. So why do you open the back door? Because I have my bag. And then you start to discover things that you would observe. They open the back door and then they put the bag in the back. So you can achieve quite a bit via drilling. But if of course, sometimes you miss. But it's not about perfect solutions, it's about good enough solutions. And we believe the trade-off between interviews and observations sometimes not justified.
Did you use gyros or Geneva for the medium, like you ask participants to the journey day? What is doing?
Diaries.
Do you find this?
We used it, but not extensively, and I think it's a great tool. I think it can be useful. But again, it's the same question. Okay, you ask to do the diaries. They write something down. It can be interesting, and then you have to analyze the thing. At our time, if you work for a bank, is expensive, so we charge money for it, and then suddenly doesn't fly. But as a startup, for example, yes, it could be a good tool. We do forums. We go into forums and we do analysis of forums. What do they discuss? So what are the topics? But we prefer to have the face-to-face or Skype interviews or so. Yeah? The key is you have to separate. There is exploration and there is validation. You can do only exploration and then make a guess. That's okay. If you don't have the money for this, it's okay. It's always still better than do nothing. Yeah? But when you do exploration, do it the job to be done way. That's our message. Try to get the solution out. Try to think the bigger why, the lower how, the deeper why. Really open up. Put yourself into the job perspective and don't ask your solution. Don't go in there and say, unless you do quick prototyping, but if you want just to discover, then you go in there and say, what do you want to achieve? What's the job you want to achieve? What do you do? How do you do it? What goes wrong? What takes time? What's annoying? What's great? And there you discover. And never go in and say, we have this great solution. We think You want to know how you find it. You're so biased. You want to hear it's great, and you hear it will be great, and then you launch it and it will